All right, I think we can get started. This meeting is being recorded. And to get us started, we have Katie Silla with us today. She is a senior advisor at King Baldoan Foundation, and she's going to talk more about the American Friends Fund. So for now, I'll just pass it over to you, Katie, and we can get
Thank
started.
you. Thank you, Somali. I know my name is a bit ambiguous, but it's actually Kadi Silla, from West Africa.
Hi.
Don't worry.
Oh my
Trust me,
gosh.
it's
Oh,
such
now
an
I know.
do not take that personally. It's very confusing to people. Like the writing apps, the spelling is completely different from pronunciation. But anyway,
That's
to your point, Kadi Silla here, representing the King Baldwin Foundation US, which has been facilitating cross-border giving for the past 22 years, predominantly focused on Africa and Europe, and now we're expanding to Latin America, as well as building a broader network that we call the Myriad Alliance for Borderless Giving, right? And we'll get to those data in a minute, but essentially, we are a US-based public charity that, as I said, facilitate transnational giving for US donors interested in nonprofits overseas. In our case, that would be mostly in Africa, Europe, but we also have a sister foundation in Canada, and we have our parent foundation in Brussels, as well as another sister foundation called Give to Asia. And together, we all provide or facilitate transnational giving across the world. And this basically means, in the context of the Friends Funds, which I'll dig deeper into later, it means whenever you have donors in the US, Canada, Europe, Australia, Hong Kong, or even China, we are able to kind of come together within this network to be able to facilitate on your behalf as a nonprofit. But in short, in Africa alone, last year we facilitated about $11 million, closer to 12, I will say, but rounding it up to 11, since it's 11.2, I believe. But overall, we facilitated across the borders about over $100 million internationally. That would include all of our network mentioned over there, members of Myriad Alliance for Borderless Giving. And as mentioned, in all these different regions together, we had facilitated, including Europe, closer to $300 million. In terms of KBFUS specifically, beyond the network of foundations that are facilitating international giving, we have several services and tools to enable us to do that. We have donor advised funds. This is a service that we provide donors. We have legacy funds, another service that's oriented towards donors. We have what's called Myriad Art, and I'm leaving the best for last, which is Friends Funds, because that's your concern right now. But let me go over an overview of all the services that we provide. But yeah, so we have Myriad Art for some of the nonprofits and also donors interested exclusively in arts and culture. That's museums, that's art festivals, that's anything to do with arts and culture. We have those, it's a niche. We have donors that are focused on that, as well as nonprofits that are also doing that kind of work. We have what we call Corporate Plus. This is typically for corporate donors, typically the MasterCard Foundation, for instance, or Visa Foundation, and so on and so forth. I would say that it's not our most comprehensive service, to be frank with you, especially because corporate giving is quite tricky. And there's a data in the slides that we'll get to when we arrive, and you'll know why. We also have disaster response funds. This is for climate change related disasters or human human enacted disasters, if you may. For instance, the war in Ukraine, we created a fund for that in order to be able to address the refugee issues, but also people that are affected by the war. So that's an example of that. The best for you guys here is the Friends Funds. I want to clarify that we do need the entity to be a nonprofit to host the Friends Funds for them. While we can facilitate to any entity, meaning social enterprises and social profits, you have services for fee. If you receive a grant, if there is a structure within your organization that is receiving a grant, we can facilitate for you. We do require a minimum of $5,000 to do so, but we won't be able to host a Friends Funds for you. And I know some of you here especially around Rwanda, it's difficult to be registered as a nonprofit. So just to kind of keep that in mind, that we can only host nonprofits as friends funds, but we can facilitate to any entity whatsoever. So that's a clarification. This is the data that was celebrated before. So this data only represents Give to Asia and KBFUS, the two members of the broader network that I had mentioned before. Our parent foundation is there, as you can see, but for Give to Asia and KBFUS, together we facilitated $141 million last year. 100 million of that was KBFUS because of its larger market in Africa and Europe and then Latin America. Whereas our Give to Asia, the rest of it, the $41 million was facilitated by our Give to Asia partners, as you can see on the map there. But all of this, again, is to really underscore that wherever your donors are, we really are here to help you. If KBFUS can do it because you're not in Africa, Latin America, Europe, but if you are in Asia, we have our partners in Asia that can also help you out with that, with the services. Same services, same fees, and same structures. Okay, so I think it would be better to kind of do a little bit of a deeper dive into our approach. For KBFUS, really rooted in our DNA is our commitment to supporting grassroots, locally led organizations and local solutions. We are very much committed to working very closely with local entrepreneurs. We believe in the sustainable solutions that they provide through the organizations and for the communities that they serve. And so we have a soft heart for social entrepreneurs from all over the world that are really creating transformation from the grassroots. So we prioritize that. We do work with like bigger institutions, INGOs in disaster contexts like the WHO type of organizations, or maybe the UN, but I would say 95% of our portfolio is centered around local solutions and local impact. So if you are an entrepreneur from the local communities that you're trying to serve, I look forward to working with you. In the Africa context, I have counterparts in Europe that are also doing exactly what I'm doing for Africa. So we all look forward to working with you. Same with Latin America. We have my counterpart in Latin America who's also working. She's fluent in Spanish. So there's no issue of cultural or language limitation, something to keep in mind. Which then brings me to the regional expertise. We have a board that represents the composition of the regions that we work with. We have people of African descent on our board. We have people of European descent, Latin America, Asia, just to kind of be reflective of the types of demographics that we work with. That's our intention, which is the same for our team. The team that we have, I'm of African descent, I'm from West Africa. I've spent my entire career in the nonprofit sector for the past almost 12 years working on Africa, even if it's international, meaning I have had a chance to work in the US context, but it has to be global with a connection to Africa. And that's really something that our foundation takes very seriously. Like, it's not simply facilitating resources across border, but it's having the contextual expertise and knowledge and the lived experience to make sure that we are able to address needs beyond financial support and financial facilitation. So something to keep in mind, that you won't have to worry about translation or getting misunderstood because of your cultural context. Each of our staff members come from the communities that we're working with, so that's not an issue. What I want to underline here, though, is that we do have a very, I would say, rigorous due diligence before we onboard any entity as a friends funds. Again, nonprofits only. We can do it for social profits or social enterprises. We look at your organizational documents, and those are the legal incorporation documents that you've been provided by your country of origin. These are typically incorporation certificate, your bylaws, which should contain dissolution clause, any financials. We prefer audited, but it's not a requirement. We understand that many entrepreneurs that we work with are typically early stage entrepreneurs, and also auditing is quite expensive. So we kind of replace that or substitute it with a detailed financial statements of your fiscal year. So meaning revenue and expenditure for any fiscal year if you don't have any financials. We do reputational check, just to be completely frank. So besides the the legal incorporation documents, besides the bylaws, we do want to know who we're working with. Do you have the track record that you indicate on your application that you do have and in your annual report? We have a huge network giving that we do cross-border giving. We have consultants that we work with. We have individuals that are from the ground that have more knowledge in any specific giving region that we do, because they have daily implementation programming and daily programs to implement in these countries. So we do reach out to them to get a sense of who this person is. We don't know them very well. Could you recommend anything that we should, or could you share anything that you might know about the leader or the program or the board? Would you recommend that we open a Friends Fund? And sometimes we have rejected applications that haven't met that standard, and we do take it seriously. So if there is a red flag around corruption or child abuse that the organization has been associated with, before the board decides to reject, we have a one-on-one with the leader to see how that's been addressed legally. So if they've been found not guilty of any accusations or allegations before we move forward. So something that I want to put out there for next steps. So as I was saying before, this is the global giving track record as of this year. But keep in mind, the data here dates back from, I think, 2008 or 2009. It's a cumulative impact of tracking money. That's actually 1991, sorry. Cumulative impact of tracking money from 1991 to 2020, both in remittances as well as individual private capital and official development assistance, which are typically the USAID, the World Bank, and then philanthropy outflows. As you can see, the blue line, right? So that's official USAID type of money. It stayed relatively flat. It's big because most governments can afford to do that for geopolitical reasons, but it stayed relatively flat throughout the years. What's been increasing, and I'll come back to private capital, that's corporate donations. That's also not very, it actually has decreased as of 2020. But what's been increasing over time are remittances and philanthropic outflows. We don't want this. This is not part of our topic today because these are like usually immigrants such as myself that are sending money back home to my relatives there and communities or contributing. So this is not really something to emphasize here, although I would say that it's actually a very strategic area to consider for diaspora giving. So if you have a connection to diaspora here, remittances will be like the way to sort of think about how do you target that in your fundraising strategies. Who are the diaspora groups, or what are the diaspora groups in whichever country you're interested in? How do you engage them to support the work that you're doing on the ground? So remittances are quite important in that context. But for the purpose of this meeting, let's focus on philanthropic outflows. The majority of giving in philanthropy are by individuals, not necessarily big institutions like the Gates. They give a lot of money, but it's not to a lot of people. The majority of money are coming from individual. And a lot of the partners that we work with, I always encourage them to emphasize the need to connect with individuals, engage your board to fundraise for you with friends, connections, and networks in the US or wherever you're fundraising, schools, your alma mater, especially if you had the opportunity to study overseas, engaging the alumni there to figure out how they can support or engage with you. I know that's not easy because I go through it all the time myself. But I think what I'm trying to emphasize here is how important it is to identify individual donors because they're more flexible. They don't have any string attached, so to speak. Their giving is motivated typically by commitment and belief in the mission and belief in you that you know what you're doing. And they're often long-term, committed at a long-term as opposed to having a fixed timeline as to telling you this is what we're giving you. We expect returns in 3 years. And by returns, most institutional donors are looking at impact. All very important, but we also know that a lot of the issues that social nonprofit leaders are dealing with are too complex to be generating impact in a very short term, right? Like there's a medium term, but you also have to be real about the complexities of the issue that you're dealing with, and how even if you create a track record of impact, something external to the organization, COVID is a perfect example, could totally wipe that away. And individual donors are powerful in that way. They're with you, they're your advocate, and you can engage them. So the growth of philanthropic outflows has been predominantly dominated by individuals. And you can see it here, right? We have corporations that are still quite small. And the reason for that is usually corporations typically can only give in the countries where they work. They have offices or staff. They're very limited in their mandate. So that's going to continue to be small, unfortunately, unless something changes in corporate giving, which hopefully is, I hope that happens soon. And we see foundations, a lot of blue, like I said, big money, but few nonprofits supported. So that's like the Gates and the Ford Foundation, Open Society Foundations, and the likes. We have this gray area. Bequest are donors that are looking to give through property, like real estate or life insurance, or some sort of like a savings account that they've put aside, and they put it in their will. If I were to die tomorrow, make sure that part of my money or my saving goes to this institution, or so on and so forth, so that the bequest falls under those categories. The individuals are the biggest contributors for international giving. So all the more reason why including messaging, thinking about how do you attract such people within your fundraising strategy is quite critical, because of their diversity, but also the flexibility that you get with them. Okay, so I was saying before, what is the culture of giving? In the U.S., you should know that all of the philanthropic contributions are tax deductible at 100%, right? The 60% is usually if you have anything from previous years, like you had donated last year, but you didn't claim the tax benefit. In the current fiscal year, you can claim that money up to 60%, of that income. You have till 5 years to complete that process. So meaning if you claim 60% of last year's giving, next year you can claim the other 40%. But if you're giving again, that new income up to 5 years you can claim. Again, underscoring the need to engage individual giving, because they have time. They have 5 years. If they engage with you today and they give, even if they don't claim it, they have next year to be able to claim 60% of that donation up until 5 years. So that's the case in the culture of giving in the U.S. market only. This is not relevant for Europe or Asia. As I had mentioned our network before, it's only relevant for the United States. At KBFUS, like many institutions that are mature like us, we accept donations of securities. Now, the trick with donations of securities is that you don't know the value of the donation until it's sold in the market. So a donor might give X amount of shares to KBFUS on behalf of a nonprofit or on behalf of a friend's fund or a social profit that they want us to facilitate, those one-offs. We can't tell you how much that money is or the value of those shares until we sell it through our securities account at, forgot what that institution is called. It'll come back to me through our securities account. And of course, I had mentioned before, bequest, so life insurance policies, retirement assets, buildings like property, all fall under donations of bequest, which is life insurance and so on and so forth. Legacy too, there is a relationship between these two. Legacies often imply that the donor is dead or is about to die, like terminally ill, and then they'll put something in their will to indicate that they want part of their money to go to that institution or that entity, which is kind of their legacy before they go away. And then the dominant one for KBFUS are donor advised funds. These are happening now, it's live, and we're sending money as the donor wishes or as they come. Okay. Now, in the context of the United States, you have two options to engage the fundraising market: donors, individuals, institutions, and so on and so forth. The first option is obviously the 501c3 being viewed as registering as a public charity in the United States. I will share, I believe Somali already has this. So those are resources to check into later. I linked them there. So please take a look. But basically, you have to register, you have to be considered a public charity. Applying for tax status has all the information that anyone in this group who's interested in doing this down the line certainly should check it out. And the life cycle of a public charity, absolutely something that I would highly recommend. In this area, though, for many nonprofits that are like operating overseas, meaning not in the United States, it gets tricky because unless you have a board member here or like one staff or a consultant that can engage the compliance aspect of the 501c3, it may not be worth it for you ultimately. The IRS has many questions, especially if you open a 501c3 here and then are planning to send money overseas. There are different categories of that. You actually have to be a public charity. So you can be a 501c3 that is receiving money from one donor. You would be considered as a private foundation, and they wouldn't allow that, right? So you need to be able to get money from different individuals. They call it a public test. And I think it has to be up to 50% of individuals donating to this entity in the US for you to be able to send that money overseas. But the board has to be independent. That's what I was mentioning before. The majority of board members, I think 3 members, minimum of 3 members are required. The majority of those, meaning 2, should be considered independent, meaning not friends or family, basically. You can open it as a conduit to send money. There are due diligence set across. That's why they want board members to be independent, because they have to decide how much the financial control mechanism of that has to be completely clear in your bylaws to say who approves what, how much before it triggers signature from a higher level. So for instance, if you've agreed in your bylaws and your financial policies that up to 25% can be sent without any checking, but above that, a board chair has to sign plus the executive director. That's what they mean that it can be a conduit if it's in your bylaws. You also have to be classified as a public charity. That's what I had mentioned before. You need to pass a public test. You can get money from one donor. That's a private foundation. So you need to pass the public test. And I think it's up to 50% of donors have to be from individuals in the public. You need to fill out IRS forms 990 as a tax return every single year. You also have to fill out the state version of that. And then finally, your operating expenses can be less than $25,000. So these are considerations to keep in mind. I highly recommend that everyone, if they've got the capacity and the network over the years, to certainly take this advantage of this, but you really do have to have these structures in place before you take that journey, because it could be, you could spend a lot of time meeting all this compliance only to realize later that you don't need it because you're not here and the program might not even be relevant for this. So something to keep in mind. The second option is the fiscal sponsorship, which is the topic of this conversation today. There are many fiscal sponsors in the US. You should definitely shop around so that you get the best services, the best fees compare them so you can decide how to go. But for KBFUS, just like if you were to have your 501c3, any money donated to your fund is 100% tax deductible. And if a donor were to decide to do that tax deduction the following year, that 60% that I had mentioned before applies here too. KBFUS, unlike the 501c3 compliance demands that you have to deal with, KBFUS handles that on your behalf. We do the yearly return, we do the 990, we have an independent board, so we check everything off on behalf of the entity that's hosted at KBFUS as a Friends Fund. What you should keep in mind is that all of that compliance and admin work and legal work has fees. For KBFUS, it's cumulative, meaning within a calendar year. Any donation you get from 5,000, we require a minimum of 5,000 to send grants overseas. So from 5,000 to 100,000, we charge a minimum of, we charge 5% of that lump sum within a calendar year, 5,000 to 100,000. If you were to pass that threshold, we have 3% for the next $400,000 fundraise within the fund in the calendar year, and then 1% for the next $500,000 within that fund. And by the time the fund exceeds, and we have a couple of funds that exceed this per year, but by the time they exceed $1 million, the fees are 0.5%. That's all you have to think about. We don't have monthly fees. We do not have yearly fees. You can open the fund and with $0 in the fund, we don't charge fees for that. We only charge fees once the fund starts to receive donations, contributions. And those fees are cumulative over the years, depending on the amount that's been raised within that calendar year. I know I'm talking a lot, so please take notes because I know I'll want to stop in a few minutes to take questions. Okay, so yeah, this is the American Friends Funds. This is how a summary of what it is and what it's supposed to be doing. I don't want to read anything on this. Somali can share this later. But what I do want to emphasize with the American Friends Fund at KBFUS, you get your donors get all the tax benefit just as if you were a public charity. You don't have to deal with the administrative needs of that fund. It is a solution for many nonprofits that work outside of the US and that are looking for that legal vehicle in order to be able to fundraise without restrictions. So you can fundraise from any types of donations, securities. We have a crypto account. So if a donor is interested in a crypto account, totally tell them if you open the fund that they can do so. We have bequests, as I mentioned before, donor advice funds, just name it. It's possible. What I do want to add here, in addition to those benefits, you do get a dedicated fund manager with the regional expertise, depending on where you're located. So if it's Africa, that would be me. If it's Latin America, that would be my colleague, Monica, who I hope you get to meet one day. If it's Europe, we have Susanna and our deputy director, Elena, who can help out as well. And you also get your own donation page. There is a dedicated credit card donation page. That's where the individuals come in often. Friends and families can donate to your page. You can customize it to what you want, to how you want to communicate that. You can run cyclical campaigns on this page. I've seen a lot of our friends fund do that. If they have a particular program or milestone that they need to reach, they create a campaign on their page to distribute it among their networks in the US, especially friends and families, and ask them to distribute it among their network. So it creates this snowball effect. We are located in the middle of Manhattan on 45th Street and 5th Avenue. We are in a very big office. I'm going to invite Somali and Michelle one day to have lunch or coffee there. But whenever you're in New York City, I want you to keep in mind that the offices that we have are actually your office too, right? Like your offices too. All of our friends funds, especially around UNGA, when they are in New York, they use our offices to plan their meetings, donor meetings, individual meetings, also use it to catch up on work. So if you partner with KBFUS, that's what you get in addition to the tax benefits you and your donors will get. We also have programming for our partners. We help them we help their fundraising journey by providing webinars. We have a consultant that is doing a lot of education content around fundraising best practices. Diaspora giving, I had mentioned before, that's closely related to remittances. But we also have specific niche where especially if you're doing arts and culture, how do you create what's your donor stewardship? What kind of communication do you send out? How do you create events to engage your donors, and so on and so forth? So those tools and techniques, we provide those webinars for free. I think they're monthly webinars, if I'm not mistaken. Then there is a program that we call Building Bridges that I'm actually in charge of in collaboration with my colleague and my friend, Monica, who is the Latin America partner, senior advisor, sorry. So Building Bridges is putting a spotlight on the partners that we work with. These are typically I want to say social entrepreneurs. We have an affinity for young, inspiring social entrepreneurs that are contributing to transformation in their communities. And we bring them to what we call like-minded spaces, conferences, to put a spotlight on the work that they're doing from the grassroots, boots on the ground. So we bring them to school, we'll take them to the Global Philanthropy Forum, paying hotel, flights, meals, everything. What do they call them? Per diems. Thank you. So we do this right now. I'm getting ready to go to San Francisco in a week because three of our Friends Fund partners, one from Africa, Kenya, the other one from Indonesia, from our Asia partner, and then the third one from Brazil. So we're going to put a spotlight on their work at a conference in San Francisco on October 16th or 17th to the 19th. My point is, when you work with KBFUS, it's really more than just facilitating money. It's a relationship, and we value that. And we try to find opportunities and experiences to put the spotlight on you so that the visibility that's being created ultimately contributes to fund in your friends fund. And you can, this is what I was mentioning before. You should check the fee structures out there. I would highly recommend not to settle right away. Check out, there are a couple of fiscal sponsors out there. I think there is CAF America, Charities Aid, and then I think there is Tides, but I don't think Tides does fiscal sponsorship anymore internationally. If you're international, I don't think they do that anymore. There's Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. All of these folks are out there. I will say, if possible, take your time, just briefly read about them, get a sense of what they do, what are the fee requirements, what is the budget requirement. Some actually require you to have a budget of at least $200,000 to open a fund. We require zero. So compare and contrast. But in addition to that, are they offering programs, as I just mentioned, the Building Bridges program, the fundraising best practices to support you on this journey? Are they offering that like KBFUS beyond facilitation? So I would encourage you to do that before you settle on any decision. This is an example of a Friends Fund. It's a case study that I love to promote. And the reason that I like this case study, I'm from Guinea, by the way, but that's not a reason why I'm highlighting it. I'm highlighting it only because Guinea is Francophone Africa. We speak French there. It's incredibly difficult to fundraise in the United States because most Americans don't know much about Francophone Africa. And if they do know anything about West Africa, it's usually Nigeria, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, which are all three of them are Anglophone Africa. And yet, Nasser over here, who was working at Facebook, I was talking about creating those individual networks, individual donors, was at Facebook. I think he was a manager of their external relations or community engagement director or manager, one of those things. Then he decided to leave his work there to go and then create a platform called Clinic O. And what the platform does is leveraging technology to enable access to primary health care for rural people across Guinea. 70% of Guineans are illiterate, which means that they run into a lot of issues reading, first researching what kind of medical issues that they have, reading what are some of the requirements to manage those medical issues, and definitely don't have the resources to see doctors. They live in rural areas, so it's really difficult. Nasser came up with the idea of creating technology to bridge that gap. It was very difficult, as I said, because Guinea is Francophone Africa. Most Americans, certainly not individual donors, know nothing about it. And it was also early stage, so he had a lot of difficulties that he faced. But guess what? He opens a Friends Fund, he gets a visibility. Suddenly he becomes Echoing Green Fellow. What he's done, like so many fellowships, I'm sorry, I can't keep track of it. I only remember the Echoing Green, but there was another fellowship, and he's getting money, he's getting funding now from Echoing Green, the fellowship, obviously, but he's getting a lot of funding from donors that are interested, especially individual donors that are interested in healthcare in rural areas in sub-Saharan Africa. While his work is a lot harder than a lot of our friends who are in Anglophone Africa, and certainly in Kenya, Rwanda, and Uganda, he is out there. He's on par with them. And we try to spotlight the work as much as we can, given the difficulty that he faces, given the location that he's in. So I like to use him as an example of that to say that if indeed you have that network you can build on, you get the spotlighting from KBFUS and the relationship building. So we keep an eye out as to who should know what about you. It definitely helps. It doesn't make it easy, but it helps. This is the dedicated fundraising pages, samples of dedicated fundraising page that I was telling you about. This is an organization in Ghana called Practical Education Network. It's a STEM education program. Right now, I think I pasted this as of last week. I think now they are like maybe at $35,000 fundraise. They had a mini campaign going on for their students. $50,000 was the target, and then I think as of yesterday, they raised $35,000. So that's just an example of what I was mentioning before. This is another program in South Africa. It's called the South African College High School, based, I believe, in Johannesburg. They provide scholarship to talented and young people from marginalized communities like Lesotho. And right now they're trying to fundraise for their scholarships. And the target is, I think, is it 50 or 500,000? I'm not saying that part. But so far, I think they've raised $10,000. And so, yeah, I think that's it. I've said a lot, so I think I should stop here to take any questions. But Somali, please feel free to share these later, since they have some resources. And thank you all for listening. Samuel, yes, go ahead, Samuel.
Hi, first and foremost, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and it's been really insightful. I'm from Caracas, Venezuela. I don't know if you have any working in Venezuela and you know about the humanitarian emergencies that we're going through. So obviously, it has been quite challenging. I have been running my venture for almost 6 years, and one of the biggest challenges is that, unfortunately, in the political nature of the humanitarian crisis, because it's a man-made crisis, NGOs as the one I run have a lot of obstacles regarding how to be able to register as a nonprofit. So we have been running out of the support of such as Resolution, which again we cannot be thankful enough for all the help that they have given us, because they were the launch the capital the seed funding for us to launch 6 years ago. So I think my main question was, I heard that we needed to be registered as a nonprofit to be able to be part of you, but if there's any way around it, or how do you do in these cases? I mean, you mentioned Rwanda, but it also applies to Venezuela when it's impossible for us to register because it's actually could lead to political prosecution. What can we do about it?
Yeah, so I would, first of all, my immediate response to your question, first, Samuel, thank you for that question. My heart bleeds for you and the people in Nicaragua, in that region. We are very much aware of the challenges that many social enterprises face and social impact organizations. So my quick answer to your question is, I would connect you with my colleague, Monica, who knows that space very well. She's from Peru, and she actually just came back from Ecuador, and the spillover effect of both Nicaragua and even Colombia to this point is quite present. So you should definitely talk to her. But in terms of the administrative aspect of your question, my quick recommendation would be, one, is it possible to have an already locally registered entity, existing locally registered entity that can become an anchor for you? Could you get them to agree that you are registered on our behalf? When we get donations, it comes to us. Now, obviously, the potential risk of that is they would want to cut from whatever you're receiving. That's something that I would recommend you explore options of, and then decide which way you want to go. But you do need an anchor organization. We actually have a few, not many, a few organizations that are operating in very complicated situations like Eritrea. The government in Eritrea will throw you in jail if they realize that you're civil society, right? And there are a couple of Friends funds that had to look for an anchor entity existing in Eritrea that is not threatening to the government to be able to receive donations. They had to do that work themselves, unfortunately. Look around to see who they can trust, who they can talk to, and who would agree to become an anchor. But because Nicaragua is quite unique, my recommendation to you definitely is to shop around, look around to see who could potentially serve that anchor for KBFUS donations, potentially. But also, so Somali, please do me a favor, connect Samuel and I so I can connect him to Monica, who has the regional expertise for this. Samuel, I hope that answers your question a little bit. I know that's
it does.
not enough.
We actually have we have an organization that is willing to provide us like the legal structure, and they wouldn't want to cut from it. So I guess it will be one of the next steps to connect. So I think that would be
amazing.
Awesome.
Okay, great. So I'll connect you to Monica and I'll explain the situation just like we just discussed. So she has a little bit of a background and then tell you what would be the best way forward. But yeah, definitely check that out.
Thank you so much.
And you're welcome. Any other questions? Alicia and Balire.
Yes, thank you so much, Kadi, for that presentation. My question is around attaining the, is it 501 status? When you're annexing overseas and you want to register a non-profit in the United States. So one of the things that you had said, are you able to hear me clearly?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yes.
All right. One of the things that I heard you say is that you have to have someone on your board who is a citizen of the United States. So my question is, does that mean that you would need to register the entity in the state where that individual lives, or you can register it in any other state as long as you have someone from the United States simply?
Yeah, so to clarify, they don't have to be in a US citizen, they have to live in the United States. That's different. So yeah, in terms of registration in any state, great question. You can register anywhere as long as the board member is willing to engage or has the time to engage. The reason that I'm suspecting being registering in their state, in case there is like a physical letter to be sent to them, they get to it quickly if they have any questions. But I suppose that's also possible in any state. I just think if you were to register in the state where the board member lives, it makes it a lot easier in terms of timeline, in terms of their capacity to engage, as opposed to if it's in Georgia and there is something to do, you have to be present in some treasury office in Georgia. That would require them to travel. So what I've seen is that many nonprofits overseas that are registering as a 501c3 in the United States usually do it in the home state of one of their board members, because in case there's a physical interview, they can go and then represent them. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. And I also want to know what it takes for an entity to have KBFUS,
KBFUS, yeah, KBFUS, yeah. Great question.
Sponsor.
Yeah, amazing question. So the entity, depending on where your location is, I'll mention the others too, but I would speak for Africa. In Africa, there are typically 3 different types of registrations. You're registered as a CBO, community-based organization. You're registered, I know that has its own limits because you can go outside of that community, but CBO is one of them. Company limited by guarantee is the second stage. The majority of our friends' funds are registered as a company limited by guarantee, especially in Anglophone Africa again. And then the next one is an NGO, nationally registered NGO. That last step is quite long. So what I typically tell our partners, do the company limited because you want to be able to implement with no restrictions. That takes about roughly 4 to 6 weeks. It's quite quick. Some people have actually gotten it in 3 days. So if you register as a company limited, you can come to KBFUS and then we can host you, but then engage the NGO process, which takes up to 2 years. So yeah, to your question, company limited, CBO, NGOs are what we require. Does that make sense? Super. I think yes. Any other questions? These are all wonderful questions. Thank you all.
Yeah, sorry, I'm gonna jump in again. I have a question. So, given hypothetically speaking, if we were to manage to find a locally registered NGO and we do all the due diligence, how's the process of procurement and transparency? So, for example, you were able to launch the fundraising and you managed to get the funds, you managed to get them to Venezuela. What's the process of us to reporting to you and how does that work?
That's a good question. So once the fund is running, you're activated, and then remember, the reporting only comes if there's been a grant. So you don't report on anything if we have not facilitated nothing to you, because you've already given us what we needed from the beginning of your registration. So we don't come back to you again and say you need to report. The reporting is only on grants facilitated, and that's usually a year from the date you receive the grant. So we approve the grant, not you receive it, we approve the grant. So let's say today, there is a grant in your fund, Samuel, that we're going to pay out today as of October 5th. Okay. The reporting for that grant is due next year, 2024, October 5th. Does that make sense? So that's how our reporting works. Every grant you put in, the reporting is due the year from when we approved it.
And perfect. And that report, it would include, so for example, I know that there's a lot of informal economies in our country. So for example, when we pay something, we don't get a receipt. So what would you need? Like, do you need a budget spreadsheet that breaks down everything that has been spent?
Yeah, we don't ask. Yeah, we don't ask for receipt. So when you're initially submitting a grant, you would submit a grant for a specific project. The grant would be, we need $5,000 for provide education to these girls or children or so on and so forth. 5 children or something like that. Whatever you submitted the grant for, at the end of the the following year, we'll need a narrative report. Here's what happened because of this money. We were able to track impact in this way, and this is how much we requested. On the application, there is a section where we ask you, did you spend all that money? And you have to say yes, because it has to be spent now, which is why we can only host nonprofit, not social enterprises. But even with social enterprises, the money has to be spent down. If there is a remainder, we would ask you if there is a plan to spend it down in the next fiscal year or in the current fiscal year. But we don't ask for receipts.
I'm sorry for it's just that my mind keeps running. When you present that budget and when you do the grants, is it possible, or would you allow to be included wages or salaries, or that should be covered aside for people that works in the NGO?
It's all included. It's all whatever is needed for your operations. Yeah, we don't have this idea of restricted. No, we don't have that. If we use it, the way that we see it internally at KBFUS is that it's part of your capacity. It's part of your capacity building. So we have a lot of our partners that need money for salaries. It's not just program, but also need money for program, also need money for campaign in a specific region. So it's all included.
And last but not least, have you ever worked with local governments by any chance? Or only nonprofits? Local governments? Like, is a public sector something you also work with, or just NGOs? Or
governments are tricky. Actually, we do work with local government. I don't know. We are like a little bit, we're secular. That's the first thing to keep in mind. We don't affiliate with any religious thing whatsoever. We are not a political entity. That's a 501c4, like meaning we don't do advocacy for anything. Our interest is social enterprises and social impact organizations and public sector nonprofit. Now, just recently, I personally facilitated money to the government of Kenya because of their climate summit. So remember, we are dealing with nonprofits through the Friends Funds, but we're also dealing with donors with different interests. And there is this donor that wanted to support the climate summit in Nairobi that literally just happened a month ago. And we facilitated money to the government of Kenya. I mean, I had a lot of issues with that, but it's not my money, it's the donor's money. So Samuel, to answer your question, we do facilitate to governments and those types of entities once in a while, but our dominant programming and services are for nonprofits, independent nonprofits.
Perfect. Thank you so much, and sorry for all the questions.
No, it's great. Thank you. Any other questions, even from you, Somali, just in case this is related to something that Project Resolution is doing?
No, this is so great. Thank you again for facilitating this session. I know, Mary, you just joined, but this was recorded. I have the slides as well. So I'm going to send a follow-up email with both the PowerPoint as well as the recording. And then, Sam, I'm going to connect you, anyone else as well who is interested in learning more about the American Friends Fund. And no worries at all, Mary, you're totally fine. But if anyone has any follow-up questions, just reach out to us and we'll connect you. If not, if you think of one right now, please just go off mute, put it in the chat. But looking at time, we can also end the session here if no one else has questions.
Yeah, definitely. And so, you know, Somali has already been connecting me to like each of some of the fellows already. So if you have any specific needs, as she said, that and this is too broad for you, don't hesitate to reach out. We'll definitely target the messaging for your needs. Yeah. Well, with that said, I want to thank Somali. Thank you so much, and Michelle, for putting this together. I really, truly appreciate this. This is a highlight for me in terms of my career, getting the
Oh,
opportunity to
amazing.
engage. Yeah, the opportunity to engage social entrepreneurs, just so special. So thank you all for your time. I know it's pretty late for some of you. So we're gonna let you go to sleep, but thank you for your time. And I promise if there's anything whatsoever that comes to mind, don't hesitate to ask Somali to put us in touch. I love to talk to you one-on-one.
Amazing.
Over
Thank
to
you
you,
so much.
Somali.
Yes. All right, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. Take care.
Take care. And I see Enoch's face. I remember him. Hi, Enoch. Take care. It's good to see you.
All right. Bye, everyone.